Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name is Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk and UK Astrologer. Hello, how are you? Now this week I'm going to be going through one chart, and I'm also going to be talking about a thing called a carer. That's a C-A-R-E-R, which isn't actually a word that's in my dictionary, but my dictionary is rather old. And in the US, they're called caregivers, but in the UK, they're called carers. But I'll come on to that in a minute. Now, because this week's episode is because I'm reading for numbers of clients that are younger than me, whose parents are now becoming old and unwell, etc. And it's so I give clients lots of advice on etc. How to cope with being a carer and how to care for someone else. And so this is what this episode is about. What do we need to take into account if we're going to care for someone else? So I thought a classic example of a carer's chart wasn't actually officially a carer. She was a nurse, and you might have heard of her, and her name is Florence Nightingale. And we're just going to have a little sort of skip around a chart and talk a little bit about it and stuff. But what I thought was important to consider was, if you want to look after other people in some way, what is it that you need to think about in that person's chart? What do they have to have, or what is, inverted commas, better for them to have if they're going to be looking after someone else? Now, I will come on to later on in this episode if you are having to care for someone, but I'm just going to start off with, and also, what do we define a carer as being? A carer is someone that cares for someone else. Now, not in a professional capacity. A carer in the UK is, most people think of them as someone that you employ to come to your house and sort your granny out. But that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about carers that are people that, because of the family dynamic, end up having to give care to someone else that they're close to. It could be a next door neighbour, it could be a relative, it could be a child, it could be a parent. For whatever reason, that person isn't being cared for in a hospital, but they're at home with someone else that has to provide the care. Now, this is what happens as you get older. Generally speaking, not always the case, you might have to end up looking after your parents in some way if they get too incapacitated. So the chart that I'm sharing with Florence Nightingale isn't necessarily what we would look for in a domestic situation where you're having to look after someone in your own home. I'll come on to what we need to be looking at for that in a minute. But because this is about caring, and a lot of people associate caring with nursing, and Florence Nightingale was basically the first official nurse, the first person that opened a hospital to train nurses. She very much was a pioneer in all of this. I am not going to go through the whole of her life. Her Wikipedia page is absolutely packed and very comprehensive, and I'm not going to be adding anything to whatever that's on there. There's plenty of information that you can find out about her, but I was interested, why would somebody even want to care for other people? What was it in her chart that made her even want to do this? Okay, so We've got a date of birth. So he's born the 12th of May 1820 into a wealthy and well-connected British family in Tuscany in Italy, and that's why she was called Florence, because she was born in Florence. Her older sister, Frances Parthenope, was similarly named after her place of birth, which was Parthenope, a Greek settlement now part of the city of Naples. Says that she inherited a liberal humanitarian outlook from both sides of her family. Florence and her older sister Parthenope benefited from their father's advanced ideas about women's education. They studied history, mathematics, Italian, classical literature and philosophy, and from an early age Florence, who was much more academic of the two girls, displayed an extraordinary ability for collecting and analysing data, which she would use for great effect later in life. In 1838, her father took the family on a tour of Europe, where she was introduced to a lady called Mary Clark, who she really bonded with, this woman who just so happened to be a Pisces, but I won't be showing her chart. They stayed close friends for 40 years, and then she underwent the first of several experiences that she believed were calls from God in February 1837. So we're going to look at that transit chart. So this is a person who ended up in the Crimea War looking after injured soldiers, and went out there to look after them, and went with a bunch of other people that did it with her. So what is it in her chart that would even, inverted commas, not so much make her want to, but would mean that she had enough practical and compassionate interest to want to do that? So she was born on a new moon. She's got the sun and moon in the sign of Taurus. The sun is 21 degrees and the moon is 22. We don't have a birth time. I'm using a 12 p.m. chart because this is what Astro Data Bank has, and I didn't want to fiddle around with it. So we'll do 12 o'clock, so that's halfway through the day. So we're born on a new moon. She has Mercury in Aries, making her quite outspoken, and she has Saturn in the sign of Aries, which is where Saturn is at the minute. She's got natal Pluto and Jupiter in the sign of Pisces, so Jupiter's happy there, and she's got natal Neptune in Capricorn and Uranus in Sagittarius. I think I've covered all the places. And Mars in the sign of Leo and Venus in the sign of Cancer. Now, what I thought was really interesting while I was looking at this chart, she's got Neptune 0 degrees Capricorn and Uranus 28 degrees Sagittarius. Now, all the indigos that I've worked with have that combo, or Uranus and Neptune in Capricorn. So she's got that signature, which I thought was interesting because that's a 170-year cycle. And Saturn in Aries, which is where we're at the minute. But we'll see some other transit things going on which are quite interesting. So we've got Venus in Cancer. So Cancer's the sign of caring. You know, if we're thinking about caring, just the word care, because the title of my Cancer book is How to Care for a Cancer. That's the sign that we need to look at. And she's got Venus in Cancer. Now, Venus is the ruling planet to Taurus, and then in the sign of Cancer. I thought that fitted rather nicely. The only aspect two aspects her sun sign makes is she's got Sun conjunct the moon, because she's born a new moon. She's got Sun sextile to Jupiter, because the Sun's in Taurus and Jupiter is in Pisces. So that's quite fun. And there's a number of trines. So Mercury trines Uranus and Neptune, and Venus squares to Saturn, and Venus's opposition to the Uranus-Neptune thing. I mean, that's a massive opposition there. Natal Mars, even though it's in Leo, it's only 10 degrees, so it doesn't form a square to her sun sign. In fact, her Mars only trines to Saturn, which is good, because that would mean that she wouldn't have quite so much energy to do the things she did. Now, it says on Wikipedia, and I also found it on the BBC website, the actual date that she had this sort of visitation from God, that part of her life mission was to do what it is that she ended up doing. And we got the transits for that, which is the 7th of September 1837. And what I thought was rather cute was Uranus was now transiting through the sign of Pisces, because she's now 17 years old. So Uranus, when she was born, was in Capricorn. She's 17 years, so she's gone from Uranus being 28 degrees Sagittarius. Now she gets her aha moment, and Uranus is quite early into Pisces. It's only 3 degrees into Pisces, but the moon is there as well. So the moon's in the sign of Pisces. So the moon would have conjuncted Pisces at some point leading up to her aha moment, and then it gets near to her Jupiter. Now, if we're going to have an aha moment, it's going to be religious. The two planets we need to watch out for are Jupiter, which governs belief, and Neptune as well, which is the psychic planet. The other thing that was going on for her was transiting Jupiter and Mars are in the sign of Leo, and they're conjuncting to her natal Leo, which makes a nice aspect to her sun sign. So I thought that was quite nice, that her first experience with whatever, I don't think she was a Christian, but yeah, it was her calling. And also Pluto is now 14 degrees into the sign of Aries. When she was born, it was 28 degrees Pisces, so that's changed sign. And her natal Saturn is 9 degrees, so deep change, transformation to Saturn, the planet responsibility. There's a lot of change for herself, deep change to what she feels responsible for and about. Okay, so that's her first major transit. Lots of other things happened to her. You can read the Wikipedia page of various things that went on, but I couldn't find exact dates, and I hate doing transits for that on that day. I found the exact date on the BBC. Now, she had another calling to God in the year 1850, but we don't have any exact dates, so I can't. But she says here, at Thebes she wrote of being called to God, while a week later near Cairo she wrote in her diary, God called me in the morning and asked me would I do good for him alone without reputation. So she had the occasional tuning into something higher. So during the Crimea War, part of her job was to report back to Britain about the horrific conditions for the wounded at the military hospitals, yada, yada, yada. So she did all of that. And then the next transit that I thought was super important was when she, inverted commas, got her first job. So let's look at that. So preceding her trip abroad, we've got on the 22nd of August 1853, Nightingale took the post as superintendent at the Institute for the Care of Sick Gentlewomen in Upper Harley Street in London, a position she held until October 1854. Her father had given her an annual income of £500, which was equivalent to nearly £60,000 in 2023, which allowed, that's a lot of money. Blimey, which allowed her to live comfortably and to pursue her career. Obviously, her career didn't pay her that much. £500 a year compared to what Daddy's given her. Her father gave an annual income of £500. Was she not paid for that job? Blimey. Anyway, so we got that date, which is the 22nd of August 1853. So let's look at the transits for that. And Neptune, which I was mentioning earlier about, connection with the divine, etc. Neptune is now very near to her natal Jupiter. So transiting Neptune is now 12 degrees Neptune, and her natal Jupiter is 17, so that's pretty close. Mars is exactly conjunct to her natal Venus, which is a happy planet in a chart. Mars is exactly conjunct that, yes. And then Uranus is now transiting through the sign of Taurus, and Uranus is 12 degrees Taurus. It's actually retrograde on that particular day, and her sun sign's 21 and her moon's 22, depending on what time of day she was born, which we don't know. So that lengthy Uranus transit, which we've just come to the end of, her career took off. Now, it's interesting with the Taurians that I've been working with whilst Uranus has been in Taurus. I haven't ever, in this present transit, I haven't done any readings for anybody that's had a fantastic time during Uranus being in the sign of Taurus. But in Florence Nightingale's case, Uranus transiting through her sign was beneficial, but also Pluto is now in the sign of Taurus as well. So she lived through Pluto going through Taurus and Uranus. So two major outer planets going through her sign. It's nowhere near her sun sign at this moment in time when she gets this job. It's only 2 degrees. Saturn is 1 degree into Gemini, and she hasn't got anything in Gemini. Mercury's retrograde in Leo, which is today. Hello. And the sun is in Leo, obviously, because this is August that she gets the job. Jupiter's up there in the sign of Saggy, which is happy in that sign. That's forming a square to her natal Jupiter. But hey, she got some money, and the moon was in Aries, which I thought was quite interesting because the moon is very near to her natal Saturn, the planet of responsibility. So we've got only two charts I'm sharing with you today. Her natal one with the transits for when she first gets her sort of calling to what it is that she ends up doing, and the second one for the date that she gets her first job. There's lots of other information on the Wikipedia page that you can find about it, but this podcast is not just about Florence Nightingale's chart. I just wanted to put into the episode a chart of someone that is famous for the care that she gave for other people. Now, in a domestic situation, if you are already caring for someone else that you didn't give birth to, so you're expected as a parent to care for your children, legally speaking, you're in the UK, I don't know what it is in the US, you're not expected to care for anyone else other than your children until they reach the age of 18. Okay, you're not legally obliged to do that at all, and even then, if you particularly didn't want to look after your own children, you could put them up for adoption. So it isn't obligatory to look after someone else. However, what's the word I want to use? Culturally, we are expected in certain cultures and countries to respect our parents. In some cultures, we are expected to care for our parents because they cared for us, especially our mothers. So there's a lot of murky areas about caring for parents and caring for other people. Now, in the UK, as I say, a carer, different from the ones that you employ through an agency to look after your granny. A carer is a person who looks after someone else without being paid. Just from the goodness of their heart, they're going to look after this relative of theirs, their next door neighbour, their child. They could have a child that's born severely handicapped in some way. That in the UK would be classified officially as a carer because they're not getting paid to do it, but the child might have a lot of difficulties and medical or behavioural or emotional difficulties, and then you're officially in the UK, you're a carer. So what do you need to look at when you're considering either caring for your parent or caring for someone else that you're not obliged to do with your children, you're expected to, type of thing? So what do you need to take into account? I have to tell you, the planet that will matter the most is the sign that your moon is in, to whether or not even you would even want to care for someone else. Now, in Florence Nightingale's case, her sun and her moon are conjunct. She's born on a new moon. So the moon is how we feel, the sun is who we are. That's someone who knows how they feel, because the sun and the moon, well, I suppose in some astrological circles you could say that the moon is combust because it's near to the sun, but I don't necessarily think that's a negative thing. But Venus being in the sign of Cancer, she's going to know how she feels. She didn't seem to have any problem with that. She was a little bit militant to how she communicated, and she was very good at mathematics, and she did like drawing diagrams and graphs and all the rest of it to demonstrate where the most amount of injuries were and what did or didn't happen to people. And she was very hot on cleanliness, that and things being sterile and stuff. There was, and making sure that things were sanitary, which apparently wasn't a thing when she came, till she came along. But if you're going to care for someone else in your family that you haven't cared for up until now, for goodness sakes, find out the moon sign of the person that you're going to be doing the caring for, and your moon sign, and what aspects in your own chart are going to be triggered by your moon. Okay, so there might be a transit that comes past whilst this caring thing has started to happen that you need to be doing. And also, how does your moon work with the person that you're going to care for? Now, in my case, I didn't personally care for my mother because we're a large family, and I took on the what's the word for it, organisation of my mother's care. So up until my mother getting quite debilitated with Alzheimer's and really not knowing what day of the week it was or anything, she was at home and living near another sibling. But then it became evident that she wasn't capable of doing it, and she also, my mother cared for our youngest sister who had Down syndrome. But because both of them were now very elderly, so my mother was in her 80s at this point, my sister was getting on a bit. She was in her 40s. And that's when I say getting on somebody with Down syndrome. They can live to be, my husband's brother lived to be 69, I think it was. Down syndrome people can live longer, but my sister got dementia later. So I took on their care package and organised it and looked after the carers that looked after my mother and my sister. So my, inverted commas, unpaid job was to organise their care via these carers, official employed carers. However, I got help from what's called our local carers centre. I'm going to put the links up on the show notes, but if you're in the UK and you're ending up having to look after an elderly relative, so just say for an example you're going to have to look after your mother because she's got in a bit incapable now and I don't know, can't look after herself, and you're having to, in the goodness of your heart, look after her, you need to go to the website carers.org, CARERS.org. And there you can find out where your nearest carers centre is. Now, this is not the same as employing a care package. This is to support you as the carer and you looking after this other person, mother, brother, sister, father, whatever, uncle even, next door neighbour, whatever. Because you now are looking after everything for them, doing the shopping for them, or not, as the case might be, but providing this care unpaid. Yeah, and the carers.org are the organisation that will find your nearest branch, and from there you can get what's called a care assessment, and they can work out what support you need to be able to continue what you're doing. And it's so important. So few people know that this resource even exists in the UK. So I'm speaking to everybody in the UK now. Make a mental note of it. If you end up having to care for someone, go to carers.org. That's not carers that come in uniforms and come to your house and do the washing up and whatever. That's not what it's about. It's about you looking after someone else for the goodness of your heart, because you feel obliged to, because they're a relative or there's somebody close to you. It could even be your husband or it could be your wife. It still makes you a carer. And then on there it'll let you know where your nearest one is. And in the UK, every county, so like Wiltshire, Somerset, every county will have a carers centre, and your local carers centre will give you support and guidance. Okay. Now, the only reason I'm telling you on the podcast is because not everybody that listens has readings with me, but I want to make sure that you know about this and you can tell other people where it might be important. But if you yourself are having to care for someone else, please find out your own moon sign and do your utmost to make sure that your moon is happy. If you've got a stressful natal aspect, which unfortunately I do, I've got Sun and Moon square, make sure that you do as much as possible as what your moon wants. Now, luckily, my own mother, our mother, because it was a big family, had the same moon sign as me, so I did know emotionally what she needed and what she preferred, so I could tailor her care package, it's called, to suit her, that there needed to be variety. It didn't bother her that a different person came to the house every day, because in a way the Alzheimer's was so bad she didn't know who anybody was when they came anyway, but she liked to have someone to be able to chat to, and all the different kids, multitude of people. In the end, I think we had a team of 6 people, but they all were quite happy to listen to the stories that she wanted to tell them about growing up in Hong Kong and going to school there and the things that she learned while she was out there. And so they quite encouraged her to talk about those things, because that's what she wanted to do. With the moon in Gemini, there needed to be some sort of conversation, keep the conversation moving, is what moon in Gemini likes to have, and it doesn't matter that there's repetition to it, as long as somebody's talking about something and la 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 la. So that I knew would be what she wanted, because I've natively got that myself, even though I've got a stressful aspect to it. So I could then ensure that the care package that she got and the things that I did to be able to help her were important. Yeah. So there's 2 things you need to consider: is the person that's going to be cared for, what moon sign have they got? Can you make sure that their moon, inverted commas, is happy? And also your moon sign, so that you need to. So I made sure I got support from the carer centre, so I could go there, and I got some counselling from them in the end. That was benefited me the most, so I could talk to them about how it was. So that you make sure that your moon is getting lots of TLC. Now, if you live in the US, I haven't done that all the way around the world, I'm afraid, but if you live in the US, you don't call it carers, you call it caregivers. So there are 3 websites I give the address for: caregiver.org, caregiving.org, and caregiveaction.org. So that's caregiver, Giver, action, or one word, .org. Those 3 organisations are similar to, but not the same, because the carers.org, the UK version, is a national web address that will then give you the one nearest to where you live. Those 3 that are in the US, I don't know where they're based. I didn't go that far in my checking, but they are USA based. But they're worth looking at, because they've got information on there on how to make it easier for you in your caring capacity. Now, the other thing you'll need to take into account if you have gone into this caring mode is, what are the outer planets doing? So are you being hit by Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, or is it a Jupiter, Saturn thing, or is it a much more fluffy thing, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, or Mars? So look at your transits, the ones that are going past and forming aspects to your moon. I don't care what sun sign you are. When it comes to caring, it's the moon is the one that's going to make the difference. Obviously, we need to take the sun sign into account, because that's your sort of waking consciousness. But your subconscious is the one that's going to either make it easy for you to do this or challenging for you. And Auntie Mary doesn't want it to be challenging for you, okay? So take into account what your moon sign is and what present transits are going on. Now, if you're in the distressing situation of this happening for you at the moment and you're happy to share your chart, we can talk about it next week. So you'll have to get it to me ASAP so that I can talk about it next week. And we can go through where you're at with it at the moment. So, how long has it been going on for? How long's a piece of string? We won't know how long it lasts for, but in what things are being triggered in your chart, yeah. And also there needs to be the dynamic between yourself and the cared for person. So you need to do a synastry. Now, everybody wants to do synastries with partners and stuff, and they so rarely ask me for synastries to do with their parents, especially when the parents get elderly and they need looking after. And I was just working with somebody today who that's likely to happen to in the very near future, and she didn't even occur to her that there's a possibility that looking at her parents' charts might help so that she could be planned and ready for it. But that's not what the call was about, so I didn't bring it up, but it was just a brief bit where that came out. But yeah, doing the synastry between you and the careful person and having that knowledge will make the caring thing so much easier. Now, this is not the same as your career or your job, or if you're a nurse or anything like that. This is about having to be a caregiver, US term, or carer, UK term, for someone else that's in your family circle in some way or geographically near to you. And it's very, very easy to slip into a caring role, especially if you're an alternative therapist. I can't tell you the numbers of alternative therapists I know that end up looking after their parents because, well, why wouldn't they? Because they know all about care and health and etc. But it's a very, 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 very stressful time of life, and you need to make sure that you're looking after yourself, because if you're not looking after yourself, then you can't care for the other person. So I hope that makes sense. Now, there's no one sign of the zodiac that's better at caring than any other, because it's more than just signs of the zodiac. But if we're making sort of standard things here, Cancer is the sign of caring. But I don't have anything in Cancer in my chart. Zero. Nothing. And in fact, I haven't got any planets in Taurus either. So I'm not Florence Nightingale here. But when it comes to family things, you do need to, especially if you're going to be caring for somebody in your family, you do need to take into account moon signs. So yeah, if this is something that's happening for you at the moment, it is happening to numbers of clients. I'd love to be able to share your chart. Obviously, I can't share client charts, and I know the clients that I've been reading for recently wouldn't even want their charts to be shared because they're too stressed about the situations that they're in. But if you're happy to share, then please send me an email, mary@maryenglish.co.uk, and we'll share your chart and send me some questions and we'll talk about it. So today we've been talking about carers or caregivers. We've been talking about Florence Nightingale's chart, Sun Taurus, Moon Taurus, and Venus in the sign of Cancer. And I hope you have a fab week, and I'll be back next week. Bye bye now.